My father introduced me to his new girlfriend, and she stared at my outfit before asking, "Wait, what year were you born?" 1996, I replied. She gasped. "Oh, I was born in 2000, Dad beamed." We were standing on the terrace of the exact country club my parents had been members of for 30 years before he blew up our family. "Let's grab a table," said, completely ignoring that his new partner was 4 years my junior. Inside the dining room, Madison immediately started filming a TikTok. I watched Dad order a $400 seafood tower for them, without even aiming at the menu. The sommelier looked mortified, but Dad just kept looking around to ensure everyone was watching them. Whenever he caught a member's eye, his arm tightened around Madison's waist, desperate to broadcast she wasn't his niece. "Madison is an influencer," Dad declared loudly, launching her own athletic brand. I watched her aggressively filter a selfie. He smiled like she was curing terrible diseases. Over the next few months, his behavior became unbearable. Dad started booking the exact VIP Pilates class my mom attended every Thursday at 9 a.m., bringing Madison along in matching neon spandex, even though his downtown condo was 40 miles away. Mom had used that studio as her safe haven. I only found out when Mom texted me in tears, absolutely humiliated. When I confronted him, he scoffed. "It's the best studio in the city. Tell her to get over it." I tried to rationalize it as a pathetic midlife crisis, but then came my younger brother's college graduation. Dad arrived late, parading Madison past the extended family, while Mom sat completely isolated in the bleachers. That was the moment I realized it was intentionally cruel. He spent the entire ceremony with his wealthy tech investors in the VIP box. I could hear them joking about his shiny new upgrade. Dad just chuckled, eating up the validation. I ignored his messages until I got a frantic voicemail claiming there was a major family emergency. I rushed to call him back. "Kiddo, I'm hosting a massive investor gala for Madison's activewear launch," he said, vibrating with excitement. "Penthouse level at the Ritz. You have to be there. I've invited all the board members and her entire influencer house coming. It'll be legendary." The disastrous image popped into my brain. My dad's balding, 60-something venture capitalist friend trying to flirt with Madison's 20-something TikTok crew. That is when a brilliant plan hit me. "I'll be there, I promise." I hung up and immediately created a profile on a wealthy older dating site, setting my age preference to 65 and up. If Dad could flaunt someone still on her parents' health insurance, I could bring someone collecting Social Security. 5 days later, I met Leonard. Thick silver hair, tailored suit. Divorced, 67 years old. A solid 10 years older than my father. We grabbed drinks at a dive bar. "So, you need a prop to humiliate your old man," Leonard chuckled. "I need you to mirror his exact level of absurdity," I explained. He laughed so hard he tore up. "I'm game, but don't get a tat. I don't want to end up looking like your creepy father." The launch gala was exactly the nightmare I anticipated. Massive ice sculptures, flashing strobe lights, and thumping electronic music. Madison's influencer friend huddled by the champagne fountain, while Dad's corporate partners hovered in stiff suits trying to look relevant. I arrived solo and played the supportive daughter for 45 minutes. I praised the spandex quality, smiled for the event photographers, then slipped out to collect my date. When I returned with Leonard holding my hand, the room practically froze. Dad was standing by the DJ booth, his arm wrapped tightly around Madison's shoulders. "Dad, everybody," I announced loudly over the bass. "This is Leonard." Dad's jaw hit the floor. Leonard pulled me close and kissed my cheek lingeringly. The silence was absolute. Even Madison stared at us in pure confusion. Then, the CEO of Dad's firm stepped forward. "Wait, Leonard Van? We served on the hospital board together in 2010. Dad furiously pushed past the crowd, his face purple. "Can we speak in the hallway? This is deeply inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I laughed. "Like hijacking Mom's Pilates class?" He stammered, flustered. "We aren't staying," I declared. "Leonard is flying me to Aspen on his private jet tonight, and we have a lot of packing to do." For the next hour, Leonard and I sat in a velvet VIP booth discussing his recent knee surgery while Dad paced by the bar, sweating profusely through his expensive shirt. When we finally walked out, Leonard gave me a high five in the elevator. 3 days later, Dad was still leaving me angry voicemail. As my final response, I texted him, "By the way, what brand of joint pain cream you use?" Leonard's hips are really acting up after our wild weekend. The phone rang exactly 4 seconds after the text showed as read. I let it vibrate against the kitchen counter, watching Dad's contact photo. A picture from 3 years ago before he traded his real teeth for veneers and his family for a ring light. Flashed repeatedly. He gave up on the 8th ring and sent a wall of text instead. "You think you're funny? You think this is a game? You humiliated me in front of Arthur Van and the entire board of the Global Tech Fund. Do you have any idea how much money Leonard Vance controls? If he thinks I'm a joke because of your little stunt, my capital raise is dead in the water. Call me right now." I didn't call him. Instead, I poured myself a cup of leftover coffee and drove over to my mother's house. Mom lived in a smaller townhome now, a 3-bedroom place 3 miles from the old house they had sold during the divorce mediation. Smelled like lavender oil and old books, a stark contrast to Dad's new apartment, which smelled like expensive leather and Madison's strawberry vape cloud. When I walked in, she was sitting at the dining table with a legal pad, calculating the utility bills for the month. The alimony check from Dad were legally locked in, but he regularly forgot to wire them on the first of the month, forcing her lawyer to send a threatening email every single time just to get him to pay. "Did you see the pictures from the launch?" Mom asked, keeping her eyes on her calculator. She tried to sound casual, but her voice had that tight, thin quality it always got when she was holding back tears. "I went," I said, sitting across from her, "and I brought a date." She looked up, her brow furrowing. "A date? I thought you were single." "I brought Leonard Van." Mom's pen stopped midair. She stared at me for 5 full seconds before her lip twitched. Then she covered her mouth with both hands, her shoulders shaking. "Tell me you didn't." "He wore a custom charcoal suit and kissed my cheek right when Dad's CEO walked past," I said. Dad looked like his heart was going to explode through his linen shirt. For a minute, it felt like old time. Mom laughed until she had to wipe her eyes with a paper towel, but the laughter died down quickly, leaving the heavy, quiet quiet reality of the empty house around us. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. He's going to cut you off, you know. He already stopped paying for your brother's summer housing allowance because Ethan forgot to tag Madison in his graduation post. Let him, I said. I pay my own rent. It's not just that, Mom whispered, looking down at the numbers on the paper. He called me this morning, before you texted him. He told me that if you didn't apologize to Madison publicly on Instagram, he was going to dispute the valuation of the remaining joint property assets in court next month. He's trying to drag out the settlement for another year, just to punish me for what you did. The air in the room instantly turned cold. That was my dad's favorite tactic, collateral damage. He couldn't hurt me directly because I didn't rely on him for money, so he went after the person who did. He's bluffing, I said, though my stomach sank. The judge already signed off on the asset lit. His lawyers can't just undo it. They can file extensions, Mom said quietly. They can claim new information about the offshore account valuation. It costs him nothing because his firm keeps a legal retainer. It costs me $400 an hour every time my lawyer has to file a response. I left her house an hour later. The petty satisfaction from the gala completely drained out of me. On the drive back to my apartment, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Dad this time. It was an unknown number with a local area code. Hi, it's Madison. Richard told me what you did with that old man. It was super toxic and honestly really sad that you're so bitter about your dad being happy. We're doing a live Q&A tonight on my brand page about dealing with family negativity. I think it would be really healthy if you joined the stream or at least left a comment apologizing so we can all move past this. Otherwise, Rich says we have to take legal steps to protect my brand's public image from defamation. Let me know by 5 p.m. I pulled over into a grocery store parking lot, staring at the little red heart emoji next to her name. She wasn't even malicious. She was just entirely transactional. Everything in her world was content or a legal threat wrapped in therapy. Instead of replying, I dialed Leonard's number. He answered on the second ring, his deep voice carrying the faint sound of golf commentary in the background. Well, if it isn't my lovely young girlfriend, Leonard boomed, clearly enjoying himself. Did your father survive the weekend? He's threatening my mom's divorce settlement, Leonard, I said, leaning my forehead against the steering wheel. And his girlfriend just texted me threatening a lawsuit for defamation because I showed up with you. The playful tone vanished from Leonard's voice instantly. She did she? What exactly did she say? I read him the text word for word. I heard the rustle of papers on his end, then the sound of a television being muted. Richard is a small man, Leonard said, his tone dropping into something much heavier and colder than the friendly guy I'd shared a beer with at the dive bar. I've known his hype in development circles for 40 years. They get a little bit of venture capital liquidity, and they think they're king. Who is his primary investor for the activewear line? I don't know, I said. Some tech fund out of Chicago, I think. He kept talking about a man named Arthur Vance at the party. Arthur is my second cousin, Leonard said flatly. We don't speak often, but we share a family trust that owns about 30% of that fund's real estate portfolio. Let me make a few phone calls. Don't reply to the girl. Don't reply to your father. Let them do their little internet broadcast tonight. Leonard, I don't want to get you dragged into a legal mess with my family, I said. My dear, I'm 67 years old. I have 2 artificial joints, and my ex-wife took half my properties in 2014. A 30-year-old tech bro and a child with a ring light cannot hurt me, but they are being rude, and I dislike rudeness. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into Instagram and searched for Madison's public profile. At exactly 8 p.m., the little circle around her face turned pink. Live, I tapped it. The screen filled with the interior of Dad's penthouse. There was a professional ring light reflecting in the floor-to-soiling windows behind them. Madison was sitting on a white boucle sofa, wearing a neon green sports bra and matching legging from her upcoming line. Dad was sitting right next to her, looking absurdly out of place in a tight black designer t-shirt that showed off his pale, untoned arms. He looked 10 years older than he had 3 months ago. The stress of keeping up with her clearly taking a toll. Hey guys, Madison chirped, waving at the camera as the viewer count climbed from 200 to 800. So today we're talking about toxic family dynamics and how to protect your peace when people try to tear down your success. It's so crazy how when you start leveling up in life, the people closest to you try to drag you back down to their level. Dad nodded solemnly, looking directly into the lens. It's true, he said, his voice carrying that familiar authoritarian tone he used to use when he was grounded me as a teenager. Sometimes you have to realize that even your own blood can be infected by jealousy. When people see you thriving, see you as someone who inspires you to be your best self, they react out of pure malice. Totally, Madison said, adjusting her hair. Like, we had this amazing launch event on Friday, right? Millions of dollars of investment on the line. And someone very close to Richard decided to bring up, well, an elderly gentleman as a joke, just to make a scene and try to humiliate us. It was honestly so disrespectful to the brand and to the hard work my team put in. The comments were flying by on the bottom of the screen. So true, queen. Who did that? Drop the name. Cut them off. We aren't naming names because we believe in taking the high road, Dad said, leaning forward. But I will say this, actions have consequences. If you choose to disrespect my partner, you choose to alienate yourself from this family. And that includes financial support. That includes legal cooperation. That includes everything. We are drawing a line in the sand today. I watched the screen, my blood boiling. He wasn't just talking to Madison's followers. He knew I was watching. He was using a 20-year-old's fitness live stream to threaten my mother's livelihood and my brother's education. Then, a new comment appeared in the scrolling feed. It didn't come from an account with a cartoon avatar or a string of numbers. It came from a verified account with a professional headshot. At Vance Propopsy, Richard T. the comment read, appearing right in the middle of the stream. Arthur Vance here. I'm currently sitting with Leonard. We need to have a conversation regarding the commercial lease agreement for your downtown office space tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. Please ensure your legal counsel is present. Madison stopped mid-sentence. She blinked at the screen, her lip parting slightly, as she tried to read the comment before it scrolled past. She looked over at Dad. Richard, who is Arthur Vance? Dad's face went from pale to a deep blotchy purple in real time. He snapped the phone out of the ring light stand, his thumb frantically scrolling back up through the comment section. The camera tilted wildly, showing a brief glimpse of the expensive messy kitchen counter behind them, covered in dirty green juice bottles and open Amazon boxes. Wait guys, we're having a technical issue, Mata stammered, her voice losing its polished influencer cadence. We'll be right back. The stream cut out. The screen went black. 10 minutes later, my phone didn't ring. It was a text from Dad. No capital letters, no punctuation, just raw panic. What did you do? Call me right now, please. What did you tell Leonard Vance? I didn't answer. I sat in the dark of my living room, the quietness of the apartment suddenly feeling very loud. The small, petty game I had started at the dive bar had just pulled a lever on a machine far bigger than I realized. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Dad wasn't the one holding the remote. At 6:30 the next morning, my apartment buzzer went off. It didn't ring in short bursts. It was one continuous aggressive drone that meant whoever was downstairs had their thumb pressed flat against the plastic and had no intention of letting go. I threw off my blanket, walked over to the intercom by the door, and pressed the talk button. Who is it? Let me up. It was Dad. His voice was gravelly, stripped of the booming, forced confidence he'd been projecting for the last 6 months. I didn't press the unlock button. It's not even 7 in the morning. I'm not letting you in. I am standing on the sidewalk in the freezing cold, he snapped, the speaker crackling with his frustration. Let me up right now, or I'm calling your landlord and telling him I'm withdrawing as your lease guarantor. I took you off the lease 3 years ago, I said flatly. Go home, Dad. Arthur Vance's lawyers sent a termination notice at midnight, he yelled. He didn't even care who in the lobby could hear him. A midnight courier? Do you understand that? They're claiming a breach of the morality clause in the commercial lease because of the live stream. I have a meeting with them in an hour and a half. You need to get Leonard on the phone and tell him it was a misunderstanding. Right now. I leaned my forehead against the cool drywall next to the intercom. The sheer entitlement of it was breathtaking. He had spent months parading a girl barely older than me in front of our family, hijacked my mother's safe spaces, humiliated her at my brother's graduation, and publicly threatened to destroy her financial stability. And now, the second his own wallet was threatened, he expected me to fix it. Call Leonard yourself, I said. He blocked my number. Dad's voice cracked. It was a pathetic, high-pitched sound. Listen to me. You don't understand what's happening. The tech fund's compliance bylaws require a Tier 1 commercial address. If Arthur pulls the lease, the address default. If the address default, the Series A funding is suspended. Not just for Madison's brand, for my entire portfolio. Sounds like you should have been nicer to the Vance then. I am not playing with you. He hit the intercom panel. I could hear the loud thud reverberate through the speaker. If that funding freezes, I am completely illiquid. I am wiped out. I frowned, staring at the little grill of the speaker. What do you mean, illiquid? You just bought a $2 million downtown condo. Silent stretched over the line. Only the sound of a passing garbage truck bled through the microphone. Dad, I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. What do you mean you're illiquid? I leveraged the capital, he muttered, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. To secure the activewear manufacturing lines in Vietnam, I had to show a massive cash reserve. I collateralized. Collateralized with what? More silent. Dad, what did you use as collateral? The joint property assets, he finally said. The offshore account and the real estate portfolio from the marriage. The knot in my stomach twisted into something heavy and sharp. The assets the judge hasn't fully finalized yet in the divorce settlement. The ones you threatened to drag Mom back to court over? The mediation isn't legally binding until the decree is stamped next month, he said, shifting back into defensive court speak. I needed the bridge loan. I was going to pay it back before the settlement finalized. The activewear pre-orders were supposed to cover it, but the fund requires the commercial lease to clear the disbursement. You didn't want to drag Mom back to court to punish her. I realized aloud, the sick truth washing over me. You wanted to delay the settlement because the money is there. You spent Mom's half of the alimony and property split on Madison's neon spandex. It's an investment, he roared. It's a high-yield athletic brand. If you just call Leonard and get Arthur to back off the lease termination, the money drops on Monday. I pay off the bridge loan, and your mother gets her pathetic little townhouse paid for. If you don't make this call, the whole thing defaults. The bank seizes the account, and your mother gets nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. He was breathing heavily into the microphone. He had cornered himself, and in classic Richard fashion, he was trying to make it my fault. If I didn't save him, Mom's financial future would burn down with him. I'll talk to you later, Dad, I said, and I took my finger off the button. I walked into the kitchen, my hands shaking. I poured a glass of tap water and drank it in one go. I needed to call Mom. I needed to tell her to call her lawyer, Mr. Trask, immediately to freeze the account before the bank realized the collateral was tied up in a defaulted commercial lease. But before I could pick up my phone, it buzzed on the counter. An Instagram notification. Madison was live again. I opened the app. She wasn't in the penthouse this time. She was sitting in the passenger seat of a car, probably her Uber, looking out the window. The professional ring light was gone, replaced by the gray morning light of the city. She had a filter on that made her eyes look glassy and red, like she'd been crying for hours. Hey guys, she whispered, sniffing softly into the microphone. I'm sorry for the weird stream last night. I need to be really honest with you all. The viewer count was already at 2,000. People live for the drama. When I started this brand, I wanted it to be about positivity and empowering women, Madison said, looking down at her perfectly manicured nails. But recently, I've realized that the people you trust the most can sometimes trap you in really toxic, controlling situations. I stared at the screen. Was she doing what I thought she was doing? I've decided to step away from my current investor, she said, a single perfectly timed tear rolling down her cheek. I didn't know about his financial problem, and I definitely didn't know about his family drama. It's been really scary, honestly, the age gap. I thought he was just being a mentor, but it turned into something really manipulative. I'm pausing the brand launch to focus on my mental health. She ended the live stream. I stood in my kitchen, entirely entirely speechless. At the first sign of a financial roadblock, Madison hadn't just abandoned him. She had weaponized her audience against him, reframing their entire relationship as a predatory manipulation to save her own PR. The irony was almost suffocating. He had thrown away a 30-year marriage for a girl who dropped him the second the check bounced. My phone rang in my hand. It was Leonard. "Good morning," Leonard said, his voice bright and entirely too cheerful for 7 in the morning. "I hope I didn't wake you. Arthur just finished his 8 a.m. meeting with your father's legal counsel." "It's barely 8:15, I said, rubbing my temple. "How did a meeting finish that fast?" "Because your father didn't show up," Leonard chuckled. His lawyer, some nervous kid in a cheap suit, showed up alone, handed Arthur a letter of immediate dissolution. "Your father's firm is filing for bankruptcy protection." The kitchen floor felt like it was tilting. "Bankruptcy? Leonard, he used my mother's settlement assets as collateral for a bridge loan. If he declares bankruptcy, her money is tied up in his debt." Leonard's amusement vanished instantly. "Say that again. He collateralized unresolved marital assets?" "Yeah. He confessed it over my apartment intercom 20 minutes ago." I heard Leonard exhale sharply. "That is federal fraud. That isn't a petty civil dispute, kiddo. That is a criminal misuse of frozen assets during an active legal mediation." He paused, the silence heavy and serious. "Does your mother know?" "Not yet," I said, my voice trembling. "I was just about to call her." "Don't," Leonard commanded. "Do not call her yet. If she calls her lawyer has to notify the court immediately. The second the court is notified, the bank will freeze everything, including the accounts she uses to pay her daily bill. She won't be able to buy groceries. So what do I do?" "You get dressed," Leonard said, his tone shifting into the cold, strategic businessman that had built an empire. "Arthur and I are sending a car for you. We need to look at exactly what your father signed before the bank opens at 9. I threw on the clothes I'd worn yesterday, grabbed my keys, and ran down the 3 flights of stairs. A sleek Blacktown car was already idling at the curb. The driver didn't say a word, just opened the back door and handed me a cardboard cup of black coffee before pulling smoothly into the morning traffic. We drove to a glass and steel building in the financial district. The lobby was empty except for the security guard, who nodded me through the turnstiles without asking for ID. I rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. Leonard was waiting in a massive corner conference room that smelled of polished mahogany and ozone. He wasn't wearing the tailored suit from our weekend. He wore a thick charcoal sweater and looked every bit the ruthless apex predator his reputation suggested. Beside him sat a man who looked like an older, sharper version of Leonard, Arthur Vamp. He was quietly sipping tea from a porcelain cup. Across from them stood a younger man in a crisp navy suit, arranging thick stacks of paper into neat columns. "This is Caden Locke," Leonard said, not bothering with pleasantries as I walked in. "Arthur's head of corporate litigation." Caden didn't smile. He just tapped a file folder. "Have a seat. We need to move fast." I sat down next to Leonard. My hands were freezing. "Dad said he collateralized the unresolved marital asset. Can he even do that? Legally?" "Absolutely not," Caden said, sliding a thick stapled document across the table. "It was a commercial bridge loan agreement from Horizon Trust. During a divorce mediation, all joint assets are effectively frozen under a temporary restraining order to prevent exactly this kind of dissipation. Your father bypassed the freeze by using a secondary corporate entity he established 3 months ago to absorb the liability. But to secure the $4.2 million cash disbursement, the bank required dual consent on the collateral, since his name wasn't the only one on the original account." Caden flipped to the very last page of the document. "Look at the signature line." I leaned over. There, in blue ink, was my mother's name. My stomach dropped. She didn't sign this. She hasn't been in the same room as him without her lawyer present in 6 months. "I know," Caden said flatly. "Look at the notary stamp." I squinted at the faint purple circle next to the forged signature. "Imogen Farrow, Notary Public." "Imogen is the receptionist at your father's venture capital firm," Caden said. "He had his 24-year-old employee stamp a forged signature to secure a multi-million-dollar federal bank loan. He committed federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. And because the loan was contingent on the commercial lease that Arthur just terminated, the bank called the loan at 6 a.m. Arthur finally set his teacup down. The clink echoed loudly in the quiet room. "Your father thought he was playing a game of chicken with me over a real estate lease. He didn't realize he was driving off a cliff. Horizon Trust automated system has already initiated asset reclamation. They don't wait for a judge. They freeze the collateral first and ask questions later." My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The screen lit up with Mom's contact photo. I looked at Leonard. He gave a grim nod. "Answer it." I swiped right and put it to my ear. "Mom? Honey, I'm so sorry to bother you this early," she said. Her voice was high-pitched with embarrassment. I could hear the beep of a cash register in the background. "I'm at the pharmacy trying to pick up my blood pressure medication, and my debit card declined. I tried to log into the portal to transfer funds from saving, but it says my account doesn't exist. Do you have $40 I could borrow just until I get this sorted out? I think there's a glitch at the bank." I closed my eyes. The coffee I drank on the ride over turned to acid in my stomach. "Mom, it's not a glitch. Where are you?" "Which pharmacy?" "The one on Elm, near the townhouse." "Why? What's going on?" "Leave the medication for now. Go straight home. Lock the door. Do not call Dad, and do not answer if he calls you. I'm coming to you right now." "You're scaring me," she whispered. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I promise," and hung up. I looked up at Caden Locke. "How long until the bank takes everything she has?" "They already have," Caden said, sliding the file back into his briefcase. "Her checking, her savings, the joint retirement account. The system flagged the entire portfolio as tainted collateral. It could take months for her lawyer to untangle it and prove she was defrauded. In the meantime, her liquidity is zero." "I'm sending Caden with you," Leonard said, standing up. "Your father is panicking. Men like Richard don't accept ruin quietly. They look for someone to absorb the impact. He's going to realize the forgery is the only thing keeping him out of federal prison, and he's going to need your mother to cover his tracks." The ride to Mom's townhouse was a blur. Caden sat next to me in the back of the town car, rapidly typing emails on his phone. When we pulled onto Elm Street, my heart hammered against my ribs. Dad's silver Porsche was parked in Mom's driveway. He's here, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt before the car even stopped. I sprinted up the walkway. The front door was unlocked. I threw it open and rushed into the hallway, the smell of lavender oil entirely overpowered by the sharp, expensive scent of Dad's cologne. Mom, I yelled. In the kitchen, her voice came back, shaky and thin. I walked into the kitchen and froze. Hayden stepped in right behind me, silent but heavily present. Mom was standing with her back pressed against the sink, clutching her purse to her chest. Dad was sitting at the small wooden dining table. He looked entirely destroyed. His hair was messy, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was sweating through his expensive cashmere sweater. Spread out on the table in front of him was a single sheet of paper and a blue pen. He looked up when I walked in, his expression instantly contorting into a mask of betrayed fury. This is a private conversation. Get out of her house, I said. I just need her to sign a retroactive authorization, he said, his voice cracking. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was pleading. It was somehow worse. He looked at Mom, his eyes brimming with tears. Nancy, please. It's just a formality for the bank. If you sign this, it proves you knew about the bridge loan. It keeps the asset transfer in civil court. If you don't sign it, they're going to file criminal charges. You forged my name, Richard, Mom whispered, staring at him like he was a stranger. You risked everything we built for 30 years for a 20-year-old girl who sells leggings on the internet. She left me, he sobbed, burying his face in his hands. Madison is gone. The investors are gone. The lease is gone. Everything is gone. Please, Nancy. We have children together. You can't let them put me in prison. He was using us. He was using my brother and me as a shield to guilt her into taking the fall for his felony. Hayden stepped forward, pulling a sleek silver recorder from his pocket and setting it on the table next to the paper. Richard, my name is Hayden Locke. I represent Arthur Vance and the Van Corporate Trust. You should know that any attempt to coerce an ex-spouse into signing a retroactive consent form for a fraudulent federal loan is witness tampering, which carries its own separate 5-year sentence. Dad stared at Hayden, his mouth hanging open. The tears stopped instantly. The panic in his eyes sharpened into pure cornered terror. You brought Arthur Vance's lawyer to my wife's house? Ex-wife, Mom corrected quietly. Do not sign that paper, Miss Trask, Hayden said, using her maiden name. He didn't look at Dad. His focus was entirely on Mom. If you sign it, you become complicit in the fraud. The bank will hold you jointly liable for the $4.2 million. He is trying to chain his debt to your neck to save himself. Dad lunged forward, grabbing the paper and crumpling it into his fist. You're destroying our family, he screamed at me, the veins in his neck bulging. You think you won? You think you did something clever with that old man at the gala? You ruined us. You ruined yourself, I said, my voice eerily calm. Get out. He didn't move. He stood there, chest heaving, looking around the small kitchen. His eyes darted from me to Hayden and finally to Mom. A nasty, ugly sneer crept over his face. The panic vanished, replaced by the cruel, calculating man I had known my entire life. Fine, he said, smoothing out his sweater. I'll leave. But you need to pack your things, Nancy. Mom blinked. What? The bank called the loan, Dad said, a 6-mile twisting his lip. And since you wouldn't sign the consent form, the collateral forfeiture is absolute. Do you know how I bought this townhouse for you during the separation? Your credit was frozen because of the mediation, so I bought it under my LLC, the same LLC I used to secure the bridge loan. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded deafening. You don't own this house, Nancy, Dad said softly, enjoying the devastation spreading across her face. Horizon Trust owns it, and since they're liquidating the LLC's asset to cover my default, you have about 48 hours before the eviction notice is taped to this door. Mom didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just slowly lowered her purse onto the kitchen counter, her hands shaking so badly the metal clasp rattled loudly against the granite. Dad took a step toward her, his face softening into a sickening display of faux sympathy. But we can fix it. If you just sign the paper, I can take it to the loan officer. I can show the bank that we're a united front. Don't touch her, I snapped, stepping between them. Hayden Locke sighed. It wasn't a sigh of stress, but of profound, bone-deep professional irritation. Richard, listen to me very carefully. Horizon Trust does not care about a post-dated consent form now. The asset transfer to cover the margin call has already been triggered by the central system. Even if she signed that paper, the bank is liquidating the LLC that owns this property. You are offering her a burning building in exchange for a felony charge. Dad stared at him. The reality finally, truly seemed to pierce through the thick layer of narcissistic delusion he'd been wearing for a year. He looked down at the crumpled paper in his fist. You have nothing, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady register that didn't even sound like my own. You threw away Mom. You threw away our family. And now Madison threw you away. You're going to prison, Dad. And you are going alone. He looked at me. For a split second, I saw the father who used to teach me how to ride a bike, the man who used to check under my bed for monsters. Then the mask slipped back on, twisted and bitter. You did this, he hissed at me. You and that geriatric bastard you brought to the party. I hope you're happy. I hope you enjoy packing her boxes. He turned on his heel and walked out. A moment later, the front door slammed, rattling the framed photos in the hallway. We heard the Porsche engine roar to life, tires squealing as he backed out of the driveway too fast. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Mom stared at the spot where he had just been standing. Then her legs gave out. I caught her before she hit the linoleum, guiding her down to one of the dining chairs. She buried her face in her hand and finally started sob. It was a horrible, jagged sound. The sound of 30 years of trust being completely and utterly violently dismantled. Hayden quietly packed his recorder back into his briefcase. I am very sorry, Mrs. Trask, he said softly. It was the most human he had sounded since I met him, but he wasn't lying about the timeline. Once Horizon Trust flags a property for collateral liquidation, the eviction process is expedited. You need to pack your essentials: jewelry, family heirlooms, crucial documents. Leave the heavy furniture. You don't have time to organize movers. I don't have anywhere to go, Mom whispered through her fingers. You're coming with me, I said, rubbing her back. We'll put your stuff in my apartment. You'll take my bed, I'll take the couch. We'll figure it out. Hayden handed me a sleek, embossed business card. Arthur Vance has retained me to oversee see the dissolution of your father's firm from our end. But if your mother's divorce attorney needs the exact timestamps the forged wire transfers, have him call my office. I will bypass the discovery phase and send him the files directly. I took the card. Thank you. Really. He gave a curt nod and let himself out. For the next 10 hours, my life became a blur of cardboard, packing tape, and adrenaline. I drove to a hardware store and bought 30 heavy-duty boxes and 3 rolls of bubble wrap. We didn't talk much. We just worked. We packed the good china Mom had inherited from my grandmother. We packed her clothes. We packed the photo album. Every time I taped a box shut, I felt a fresh wave of hatred for my father. He was probably sitting in his $2 million downtown condo, a condo he likely bought with the same fraudulent fund, trying to figure out how to save his own skin. By 4 in the afternoon, the townhouse was stripped of its personality. It was just an empty shell of beige walls and indentations in the carpet where the furniture used to sit. We loaded the last of the boxes into my Subaru, the suspension groaning under the weight. When we finally got to my apartment, it was cramped. My place is a modest 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor. By the time we stacked Mom's boxes in the living room, you had to walk sideways just to get to the kitchen. Mom sat on the edge of my sofa, looking entirely hollowed out. She was holding a framed photo of my younger brother, Ethan, from his high school graduation. I need to call Ethan, I said, realizing with a jolt of guilt that I hadn't even thought about him all day. Ethan was 21, finishing his junior year at a college out of state. He had been staying in his off-campus apartment for the summer, the apartment Dad paid for. Mom squeezed her eyes shut. Oh God, his rent is due next week. If Richard's accounts are frozen, I'll handle it, I said, pulling out my phone. I have enough in savings to cover his rent for a month or 2. Let me talk to him. I stepped out onto my tiny balcony and dialed Ethan's number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. On the 3rd try, he picked up. I can't talk right now, Ethan said. His voice was frantic. In the background, I could hear the sound of drawers slamming and things being thrown into a bag. Ethan, stop what you're doing and listen to me. Things are really bad here. Dad committed fraud. He used Mom's settlement money as collateral. The bank caught it, and they just foreclosed on Mom's townhouse. She's staying with me. There was a dead silence on the line. The rustling in the background stopped entirely. Ethan? He tried to take it, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. Tried to take what? My tuition fund, Ethan said, breathing heavily. The 529 account Grandma left me. Dad is the custodian, but it requires my digital signature to withdraw more than 10 grand. He called me 3 hours ago. He was crying. He said the SEC was auditing him, and he needed $50,000 to cover a legal retainer, or he was going to jail. I gripped the balcony railing, the metal biting into my palm. Did you sign it? No. I told him I needed to call Mom first, and he started screaming at me. He said I was an ungrateful brat and that if he went to prison, it was my fault. Then he hung up on me. Ethan swallowed hard. I'm packing my car. I'm driving home. I don't know what's going on, but I'm coming to your place. Drive safe. We'll be here, I said, and hung up. I leaned against the brick wall of the building, feeling physically sick. He hadn't just sacrificed Mom. He had actively tried to drain his own since college fund just to buy himself another day of freedom. He was a cornered animal, biting anything that got near him. That night, Mom took my bed, and I slept on the couch, surrounded by towers of cardboard boxes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the smug look on Dad's face at the country club, ordering that $400 seafood tower for Madison. It felt like it had happened in a different lifetime, not just a few months ago. The next morning, I woke up to a sharp, authoritative knock on my apartment door. I sat up, peeling the blanket off my leg. It was barely 7:30. Mom was still asleep in the bedroom. I grabbed a sweatshirt, threw it on over my t-shirt, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. It wasn't Dad. It wasn't the police. It was a young woman. She looked about 25, wearing a sharp trench coat and holding a leather portfolio. She looked exhausted, the skin under her eyes bruised with lack of sleep. I unchained the door and opened it a crack. Can I help you? Are you Richard's daughter? She asked. Her voice was tight, professional but drained. Who are you? My name is Sable, she said, shifting her weight. I'm the junior compliance officer at your father's venture firm. I'm sorry to show up at your home, but your address was listed as his emergency contact in our HR file. I opened the door a little wider. What's going on? We can't find him, Sable said, gripping her portfolio tightly. He didn't show up to the office yesterday, and he didn't log into the server this morning. The problem is, federal agents from the SEC walked into our lobby at 6 a.m. with a preservation warrant. They are currently cloning our servers. I stared at her. Hayden hadn't been kidding about Arthur Vance moving fast. I don't know where he is, I told her truthfully. He came to my mother's house yesterday morning, but we threw him out. He hasn't contacted me since. Sable closed her eyes for a second, letting out a long, ragged exhale. Okay, thank you. She turned to leave, then hesitated. She looked back at me, her professional facade cracking just a fraction. Just if he does contact you, tell him he left us out to dry. Imogen, our receptionist, the federal agents have her in a conference room. They're asking her about notary stamps. She's 24 and she's crying so hard she's throwing up. He told her those documents were standard internal transfers. I'm sorry, I said, and I genuinely meant it. But he left us out to dry too. She nodded grimly and walked down the hall. I closed the door and locked it. The walls were closing in. Dad wasn't just bankrupt. He was a fugitive from federal investigators, and he was dragging a trail of destruction behind him that included everyone who had ever trusted him. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. I walked over and picked it up. It was an alert from my banking app. Transfer of $15,000 from Vance Trust LLC to checking successfully cleared. I stared at the screen, completely paralyzed. $15,000. I hadn't requested a transfer. Before I could even process what I was looking at, a text message popped up from Leonard. Arthur tells me your mother's accounts are locked down. Hayden informed me about the eviction. The transfer is a gift, not a loan. Rent a storage unit for her things and take her out for a decent lunch. We are having a wonderful time in Chicago. Tell your father I say hello. If you see him, I let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Leonard Vance wasn't just mirroring my father's absurdity anymore. He was dismantling my father's life while simultaneously funding my mother's survival survival, all without breaking a sweat. I walked into the bedroom. Mom was sitting up in bed, staring blankly at the wall. Mom, I said gently, get up. We're gonna get some breakfast. Then we're going to find you a nice, secure storage unit. She looked at me, confused. With what money? I can't even buy a coffee. Leonard sent us a care package, I said. A tiny, fragile smile broke through the devastation on her face. We spent the morning organizing. I rented a climate-controlled storage unit 2 miles from my apartment and paid for 6 months upfront in cash. We moved the heavy boxes out of my living room, giving us space to actually breathe. By noon, Ethan had arrived. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot from driving all night. He hugged Mom for a long time, both of them crying quietly in my small kitchen. We were sitting around my tiny dining table, eating takeout sandwiches when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. The emergency double call. I answered it. Hello? I need your help. The voice was barely a whisper, hoarse, ragged, and terrified. It took me a full 3 seconds to recognize it. Madison? I said. Ethan and Mom both stopped eating and looked up at me. Where are you? Madison whispered. I could hear traffic in the background, the loud rumble of a bus passing by. Are you at your apartment? Please, I don't know who else to call. Why are you calling me? I demanded, standing up and walking away from the table. You made a whole live stream about how toxic we are. You abandoned him. Because he's outside my building, she cried, her voice cracking with pure panic. I'm hiding in the coffee shop down the street. He's been sitting in his car outside my lobby for 3 hours. He won't leave. He keeps texting me from different numbers saying he lost everything and that I owe him because he bought the inventory for my brand. I called the police, but they said since he hasn't physically threatened me or approached me, he's allowed to park on a public street. I rubbed my forehead. The SEC was tearing apart his office. His firm was bankrupt. He had warrants out for fraud, and instead of calling a lawyer or fleeing the state, Richard was sitting in his Porsche outside a 20-year-old influencer's apartment, demanding a return on his investment. Madison, I can't help you, I said coldly. He's not my problem anymore. He has my dog, she blurted out, her voice breaking into an outright sob. I froze. What? My French bulldog, Coco. I left her at his penthouse yesterday when I packed my bag because I was in a rush and I couldn't carry her crate down the elevator. I told the concierge I'd send a pet taxi for her today. But Richard went back to the penthouse last night and took her. He sent me a picture of her in the passenger seat of his car. He said if I don't come down and talk to him about the activewear revenue, he's driving her to a shelter in the next county. I let out a sound that I didn't even recognize, a harsh, scraping laugh that came from the absolute bottom of my chest. He took the dog? Yes, Madison wailed, the sound of her crying mixing with the hiss of an espresso machine. She has a sensitive stomach. She's on a highly specific kibble. She can't be in a hot car. You have to tell him to stop. Madison, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice dropping into that same flat, authoritative tone I use when dealing with stubborn clients at work. Do not go outside. Do not reply to his text. What is the address of the coffee shop? She rattled off an intersection in the West Loop. Stay inside, I told her. I'll handle it. I hung up the phone. Mom and Ethan were staring at me, their sandwiches entirely forgotten. What did he do now? Ethan asked, his voice height. He's sitting outside Madison's apartment building in his Porsche, holding her French bulldog hostage until she talked to him about his activewear investment, I said. Saying it out loud made it sound even more absurd. It was the absolute pathetic bottom of the barrel. The man who had worn $3,000 suit and sneered at my mother's Pilates studio was now resorting to small-time dog theft. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the thick, embossed business card Caden Locke had given me yesterday. I dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. Locke, he said, his voice crisp. Hi, Caden. It's Richard's daughter, I said. I know exactly where my father is. And I know you probably have a direct line to the federal agent currently tearing apart his office. There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of typing. I am currently sitting in a conference room with 2 investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Yes, where is he's parked near the corner of Randolph and Halstead in the silver Porsche. He's trying to extort his ex-girlfriend by holding her dog hostage in the passenger seat. Caden let out a very long, very deep sigh. It was the sound of a man who dealt with high-level corporate espionage, being forced to wrangle a toddler, extorting her for the activewear capital. Yes, I will pass the location to the agent, Kate said. Thank you for the call. We'll take it from here. I hung up, walked back to the table, and picked up my sandwich. Mom and Ethan just looked at me. So what happens now? Mom asked quietly. Now, I said, taking a bite of turkey and Swiss. We eat lunch. We didn't go down there to watch. I didn't need to see it, and I definitely didn't want Mom or Ethan anywhere near him. We found out exactly how it went down 3 hours later when Madsen posted a tearful, highly edited TikTok video titled Surviving a Narcissist and Rescuing My Fur Baby. According to the video, and later corroborated by a very dry email from Caden Locke, the federal agents didn't even need to box his car in. They found Richard arguing with a city meter maid who was trying to write him a ticket for idling in a loading zone. When the agents approached the vehicle and asked him to step out, he completely broke down. He didn't invoke his right to an attorney. He didn't stand tall. He just put his head on the steering wheel and sobbed loudly, begging them not to take the Porsche because it was a leak. They handcuffed him on the sidewalk. Madison's doorman retrieved the dog. The next 6 months were a slow, agonizing untangling of the massive knot Richard had made of our lives. But for the first time, we weren't the ones being strangled by it. Richard was denied bail, entirely because of the blatant witness tampering and the forged notary stamp on a federal document. Imogen, the 24-year-old receptionist, was granted full immunity in exchange for her testimony, which she gave willingly and enthusiastically after realizing he had tried to throw her under the bus. The bankruptcy of his venture firm was a bloodbath, but because Arthur Vance and Caden Locke had moved so aggressively to isolate the fraud, the fallout was surprisingly contained. The bank, Horizon Trust, still liquidated the LLC that owned Mom's townhouse, but the court ruled that Mom was an innocent spouse and a victim of identity theft. She didn't get the townhouse back, but she didn't walk away with nothing either. Leonard Vance, operating through a secondary holding company, purchased the remaining clean real estate assets from Richard's portfolio at fair market value during the bankruptcy auction. The cash injection from that sale went straight into the divorce settlement escrow. When the dust finally settled, Mom received a check that wasn't millions, but it was enough to buy a beautiful, quiet little 2-bedroom cottage outright, with enough left over to ensure she'd never have to look at a calculator to figure out her utility bills again. Ethan's 529 college fund remained untouched. He went back to school in the fall, moving into a cheaper apartment with 3 roommates, having decided he preferred paying his own rent with a part-time job rather than relying on money that could be used as a weapon. As for Madison, she launched her activewear line 3 months later. The brand was heavily marketed around overcoming toxic situations and empowering your inner. The leggings were $75 a pair, and they were completely see-through when you bent over. The company quietly folded by Christmas. I only saw Richard one more time. It was during his sentencing hearing. Mom refused to go, and Ethan had midterm, so I went alone. I sat in the back row of the federal courtroom. He looked smaller. His hair was thinning rapidly without his expensive salon treatment, and his custom-tailored suit had been replaced by an oversized hand jumpsuit. He spent the entire hearing staring at the table, refusing to look back at the gallery. When the judge handed down a sentence of 72 months in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and obstruction, Richard didn't react. He just let the bailiff lead him through the side door, shuffling his feet, a thoroughly broken man who had finally run out of people to blame. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, crisp afternoon air. The city felt different. It felt lighter. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Leonard. Over the last few months, we had stayed in touch. Not romantically. He was entirely serious when he said he didn't want to be the creepy older guy, but we had formed a strange, deeply respectful friendship. He liked my absolute lack of filter, and I liked that he was the only person who could match my cynicism with actual leverage. Arthur tells me the gavel came down to the tech red. I am sitting at the dive bar. I ordered you a beer and a plate of those terrible nachos. Like, come celebrate, I smiled, typing back a quick. On my way, I put my phone away, zipped up my jacket, and walked down the step toward the subway station. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't look over my shoulder. I just kept walking forward.